Hi there, in this lecture we are going to set up our camera and the game's resolution. We are going to do this in a script. A script is usually used to create a function, but you can also create other stuff like different kinds of variables. Everything you create in a script is globally available throughout the project, and the code within the script runs as soon as the game starts. So this is a good place to initialize global data and to set up the window size and so on. One kind of variable that we are gonna create in this lecture is called a struct. You know how a variable can store a value and you can create multiple variables to store different values. A struct is simply a collection of variables. So you can create a struct using curly brackets. Within those brackets you can create variables with values, but instead of using the equal sign, here you use the colon sign. This is simply how you create variables inside a struct. You can then add a comma and create more variables and so on, and this is simply what a struct is. Now to get a value from a struct, you simply write the name of the struct followed by a dot and then the name of the variable that you want to access. So creating and using a struct is just that simple. In the asset browser, I'll create a group called scripts, which is going to store our script assets. Make sure that the scripts group is selected, then go up here and create a new script asset. I'll name this SCR resolution, where SCR stands for scripts. You'll see the script window open up in the workspace, and inside the script we already have a function. We'll learn about this in a later lecture, but right now we don't want to create a function, so I'll remove this. We just want to create a struct and call some functions to change the game's resolution. Let's create a struct to store the game's resolution information. I'll add this. Here we are creating a new global variable called res, short for resolution. We are setting this equal to a new struct created using curly brackets. Let's add our first variable inside this struct. This variable is called width and it has a value of 320. Notice how we are using a colon sign here instead of the equal sign because we are now inside a struct. Now let's add some more variables. Make sure to add a comma before creating a new variable. And now let's see what these are. First we have the width and the height of the game's camera. This means our game's internal resolution is 320 by 180. That works out for our pixel art game, but that means that the window will be very small. And that is why we have a scale value here. This means that our game window will be 4 times larger than the camera size, so we can easily see the game. Let's change the game's resolution now. For that, I'll add this. First of all, here we are creating a local variable called width, which stores the final width of the game window. So here we are getting the camera's width from our struct by entering the struct's name, then a dot, then the name of the variable that we want to access. And then here we are getting the scale. We are multiplying them together, which is then stored in the width variable. Then we are doing the same for the height, multiplying the height with the scale. And now we know what the final size of the window should be. Now here we are running a function called surface resize. We are using this to change the resolution of the game. Now a surface is simply a canvas where something can be drawn, and the application surface is where the game is drawn, so resizing it changes the resolution. We are setting its width and height to our game window's width and height. So that's the resolution, but we also need to resize the window itself, so I'll add this. We are running a function called window set size, and this changes the size of the game window. We are setting it to the width and height in our local variables. After that, we are running a function called display set GUI size, which changes the size of the GUI layer that is drawn above the game. This is used to draw the HUD and other GUI elements and will make it the same size as the window itself. If you run the game now, you'll see that the window has a different size. We still need to make a camera, but you'll notice something odd. The window is not in the center of the screen. We want it to be created at the center, so let's add some more code to our script to handle that. I'm going to add this here. This function gets the width of the display, which means the whole screen and not just the game window. We'll store that in this variable. Then we'll get the height of the screen. So now we know what the resolution of the user screen is, which we can use to center our window on that display. Now here I'm running a function called window set position, which is used to change the position of the game window on the display. It takes two arguments, the X position and the Y position for the window. Now I know this looks odd, but I've simply placed each argument on a new line to make it easier to understand. And now let's see what each argument is. For the X position, I'm dividing the display width by 2 to get its center point. Then I'm dividing the window width by 2 so I get its center point. Then I'm subtracting that from the display center so that the window is placed in the center on the X-axis. And then I'm doing the same on the Y-axis, dividing the display height by 2, then dividing the window height by 2, and then performing a subtraction. If you run the game, you'll see that the window is centered now, but we are still seeing all of the room, so now we are going to set up a camera. We'll do that in a new object. So in the asset browser, I'll create a new group and name this objects. In this group, I'll create a new object and name this Room Manager. So this will manage things related to the room, which includes the camera. Now let's open the room, make sure that the instances layer is selected, and place the Room Manager anywhere you like. Now let's go into the Room Manager object and here add the create events. In this event, we are going to create the camera. So first, I'll add this. Here we are simply getting the camera's width and height from our global struct and storing them in these local variables. We are only doing this so that they are easier to write since these local variables have shorter names. And now we are going to call a function to create our camera. Here I'm calling a function called cameraCreateView, and this is used to create a camera. That camera will be stored in this variable, but first we need to pass some arguments to this function, so let's do that. These are the initial X and Y coordinates of the camera, so we can just set that to 0 and 0. Then we have the width and height of the camera, so we are passing in the width and height that we got from our struct. And now there are some optional arguments that we are going to pass in to supply some extra info to the function. This is the angle or rotation of the camera, and since we don't want it to rotate, we are setting it to 0. Then we have the object that it should follow. Later we are going to set this to the player, but right now we don't have an object for that, so I'll set this to no one, which simply means no object or instance. Then we have the speed limits of the camera on both axes, and since we don't want a limit, we'll set these to -1. That simply means no limit. And finally we have the X and Y borders of the camera. This is simply how much margin the player has within the camera space to move around until the camera also starts moving. We want the camera to always move with the player, so we'll set the X margin to half the width and the Y margin to half the height. Now we need to enable views since the camera system makes use of the view system, so I'll add this. First of all, here we are enabling the view system. This variable is green because it's a built-in variable, so whenever you see a green variable, it means that it's a special variable that has a certain functionality in GameMaker. So for example, this variable can be used to enable or disable views. Then we are making the first view visible. Since we only have one camera, we have 0 here, so that means we are enabling the first view. These brackets are used with arrays, so this is an array, but we don't need to worry about that right now as we learn about them in the future. Now here we are calling a function called viewSetCamera, which is used to assign a camera to a view. We are assigning our camera to the first view, which is view 0. So our camera will now be used and it will be visible in the window. Everything is done now, but only one thing is left. We need to make sure that this camera is destroyed when the room ends. So in the events window, I'll add the cleanup event. This event runs whenever the instance is destroyed or the room ends, and can be used to clean up any resources that we have created and don't want anymore. Since a camera is created whenever a room starts, it should be destroyed when that room ends. So here I'll add this. This function will simply destroy the camera that is stored in this variable. Let's run the game now, and in the game window, you now only see a part of the room, so the view is not distorted anymore. This means that we can easily add a player object, and when the player moves around, the camera will also move. So now let's start working on our player character in the next lecture. So that's all for this video. Check out my other tutorials from here and make sure to subscribe for more GameMaker content. I'll see you in the next video.